As we get back into the subject, I'm reminded of Lost at Sea, the movie by Robert Redford. I don't know how many of you saw that. I think he did the whole movie on his own, kind of like Castaway with what's his name, Tom Hanks. And none of you're too spiritual to know movies, right? Is that what it is? Yeah, and then there was Unbroken more recently, but all three of these movies portray the ocean and being lost on the ocean and how vast it is and how scary it is to kind of get carried away by the currents and lose your reference point. And I was thinking of that this morning because that's what these Beatitudes are. Having gone over them in detail, we're coming to the last two. We can summarize them so quickly thanks to Jesus, such a great teacher, brilliant, pithy, short, memorable, and yet deep and profound. And the reason is because it's our reference point to know if we're really Christian. Is Fairfield Christian Church really a Christian church? Are we true Christians? Are we genuine disciples of Christ? So much happens in the name of religion. So much happens with that sense of false assurance. And so Jesus, the one who produces the genuine experience and one day will judge it, starts his first recorded sermon with 8 Beatitudes that are reference points for whether or not we're really Christian. That's how we're approaching them. They're not just nice, cross-stitch, put it on the wall. They're spoken by the man who had just healed every disease that was brought to him, cast out the demons. They're spoken, as we'll see today, by the Prince of Peace who calmed the wind and the waves. They're powerful, and they describe the one who's truly connecting with Jesus. So whether you've connected with him and you want to just have a more genuine experience of him and you're wanting to learn what that's like, or whether you're thinking, man, I'm not sure I've ever connected with him, and you can connect now while there's still time and experience him in this short life in a way that will land you in heaven with a quality, rewarding experience in heaven. It's that important. That's why we started with that early in our new chapter as a church. We've started with this because we want to be authentic. We're never going to reach our goals. We're never going to impact our community till we really are Christian. If we're Christian, it's going to be powerful. So with that now, we come. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, right? That's the first thing. Be poor, be humble, desperate, begging God. Have you ever come to that point, and to the point even where you cry? Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. It interrupts your life. You think deeply about it, and you stop everything you're doing, and it goes deep in you, and you let God know you're serious about it. It's not just a poverty, it's a mourning. And then you enter life meekly. There's been a change in you that's caused you to relate to your world in a gentle way, a tame way. You take the bit like the horse, strength under control. And then finally, hungry and thirsty for righteousness. The emptiness is now the emptiness of an empty stomach, longing to be filled. And then there's that experience of him filling us with his righteousness. And then that righteousness, what does it look like? It's merciful. It's forgiving and being forgiven all the time. It's pure in heart last week. A single controlling passion from the inside out of all that we do, affecting our heart and everything as it is expressed. It's a single, authentic passion that comes through our life. Does any of this ring a bell? This is the real Christian experience. Well, now we come to the last two. And again, I hope it is clarifying for you. I hope it points the way to the real Jesus and to the real Christian experience, because the last two we read in Matthew 5, verses 9 through 12. Matthew 5, verses 9 through 12. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. And then the final, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So the last two, blessed are the peacemakers, blessed are the persecuted. Don't know if that's what you were thinking about, but this is what Jesus picked, and let's look at it, let's think about it, see how it's so important and why it's so significant as a key way to describe our genuine Christian experience. Peace. Blessed are the peacemakers. Why is this peace so important? I'm just going to ask 3 questions that help lead us to think about being peacemakers and why that's so important. Why is this peace so important? Well, I'm not sure. Are you aware of the cost of the war in Afghanistan and Iraq since 2001. Are you aware of the cost? It's in the trillions of dollars, and it's hard to even estimate the amount of wounded and how serious they have to be wounded to count. But let's just go with the lives that it cost. So far, it has cost the lives of over 6,800 servicemen and women. 6,800 of our own United States servicemen and women. In Vietnam, over 58,000 of our servicemen and women died. In World War II, over 291,000 died. Again, not counting the money, the damaged property, the wounded, the maimed. Wars are expensive. That's why peace is so great. Why is peace so great? Because war is so horrible. And if we want to get less dramatic, where we live our lives every day, the enmity that we experience with one another, the tension, the arguing, the fighting, the discord, the way we feel that in a family, how painful that is, how deep, that's so expensive. How expensive is your lack of peace? We could take it not just from harmony or unity with people, but also within our own heart and mind. How are you doing in your mind? Is your mind racing with anxiety? Is your heart burdened down, weighed down with dread? Well, whether it's within us, whether it's between us in relationships, or whether it's between us and God, we need peace, and peace is extremely valuable. And Jesus is saying, if you're a Christian, you don't just have it, you make it. You don't just have peace. You're like a factory. You make it. You are a peacemaker. That's like the family recipe. You'll be called the children of God. It's the heritage of being in the faith, that we are so characterized by peace that we could be called peacemakers. Now think of peace, and I want to give you a few metaphors. I know for me, I like to think of peace as rest, because when we're at peace, we're resting, and we're being refreshed instead of worn out in whatever ways. I remember my math and chemistry teacher in high school. She was one of my best teachers. In fact, probably the most capable to prepare me for college. She taught at a college level, even though it was in high school, and she just sort of left you behind and you had to just catch up to her, and she did that on purpose. So she was a good teacher, but man, she came across with the demeanor of a drill sergeant. And the first day of class, she literally marched up and down the front with her hands like this. And she was gruff, and she was surly. And the other thing about her, in the midst of that kind of mood all the time, she would say to us, I don't need more than 5 hours sleep a night. She used to brag about that over and over, and we used to silently pray that she would sleep longer every night. So please, Lord, help her just sleep a little bit longer. Because sometimes that's the nice thing you can do for someone, or for your family, is just sleep. Please take a nap. It would be so much nicer. Because rest, not only is rest a very nice thing to do, it's even a weapon in war. A general will rest his army and knows that rest is actually that important. It's a weapon. So, this can be a nap, it can be a rest, it can be a day off, it can be a vacation, it can be a sabbatical, even on the larger level of our career. But listen, 100% of the time of our life, it can be the peace of God. The peace of God is like that. When I was in seminary, I was the busiest I've ever been in my life. My family was starting and everything else. And a professor, a very dynamic professor that I admired, I loved his passion, he sold me on the Sabbath. He came in one day and he taught the Sabbath, and I bought it and I've practiced it ever since. That's 1 day in 7, just stop everything you do. And that's another whole sermon, but let me just tell you, I love my day off. That's the reason I'm still a minister, okay? To be able to sustain what has to happen in a ministry for long enough for the results to come in, you have to pace yourself. And I know that's been true for me. It's just really true for all of us. So I love my day off, and church has to burn down for me to come in on my day off, okay? It would have to be some significant thing. And the reason, of course, is I just have to have that rest. And then God can bless the other 6 days and make them truly productive. So being a Sabbath lover, I loved it in Hebrews when Jesus is presented as our Sabbath rest. Jesus said, I'm your ultimate day off, your ultimate excuse not to work. Jesus comes to us 24/7 and says, let me relieve you of the work under the work, the work that isn't productive, the work you don't have to do, that really burns you out, the work of dread, the work of worry, the work of having to please so many people that you really don't have to please, the undercurrents, all of our idols that are driving us. Jesus comes to us and he says, when you relate to me, I will be your Sabbath rest all the time. All the time. Another metaphor of peace is a garrison in a war zone. Okay, a garrison. And this is presented in Philippians 4:7. It says, God's peace will stand guard over our hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. And the Greek word for guard is the word phrueo, which is a military word to stand watch, to keep under protection or strict control. It refers to the protection of a small group, of a garrison of soldiers. And so God's peace isn't there like a beach chair in the Caribbean. Some people are looking for avoiding problems. They're looking for avoiding responsibilities. And to do that, you have to not love anybody. To do that, you have to not sign up for anything significant or try to do anything really purposeful in your life. You have to try to just find a problem-free life. And that's trying to make our own peace, and it will never work. God says, no, my peace is way better than that. It's not a beach chair in the Caribbean. He says, my peace is a garrison in a war zone. Which means, he says, you can go into real life where I know there's a lot of problems and a lot of conflicts. He says, and I'll guard you. I'll be there for you. The peace that shouldn't be there, the peace that transcends all understanding, will guard your heart and your mind. Again, where it shouldn't be. I will be there for you so you can handle conflict. You can come next to folks who are having troubles and problems, and you can sign up for more responsibilities, and you can enter into more conflict, and you'll discover that I'll help you not only have peace, but make peace in those situations. It reminds me of Young Life Family Camp. I don't know if you've ever been to family camp. I highly recommend it. Nobody does camp better than Young Life. And I went to one of their camps is in Asheville, North Carolina, called Windy Gap. And our kids were younger then, and I'll never forget the first night. They were so good. They were so in control that they could introduce chaos and make it fun and not have to call the National Guard, okay, as a result. So the first night it was time to go to bed. The program director gets up, and he's very boring. And he's like, okay, kids, it's time to go to bed. All the fun is over now. And the Big Bird's Muppet is standing up behind him with a sign, do you really want to go to bed? And the next sign was, how about a pool party? And it's like the little kids are looking at the sign. They don't care about the stupid program director. And they're like, yeah! You know, I'm a leader. I'm like, how could you introduce a mutiny to your main director here? How could you handle that? The next night, they had a symphony skit they were doing, and they had given everybody popcorn. And the whole thing was they sort of secretly instigated a food fight where they were throwing popcorn at the people up on the stage. I'm thinking, oh, that's crazy. How could you even handle that? They moved us on to the next activity, and the place was a mess. I came back 10 minutes later to get my coat, which I had forgotten, and the place was perfectly clean. They ran 20 vacuums with tons of high school volunteers, and they could handle chaos because they were so strong. They were such strong leaders that they were able to handle it. And that just reminds me of how God can give us that peace. It's like, it's not just a peace that depends on wonderful circumstances. It's a peace that can handle conflict, which means we can be leaders, which means we can help people who are hurting and who are struggling. And we can actually make peace for them. Not only have it, but make it for them, because it's a garrison. It's not a beach chair. It's a garrison. And it can take place where it shouldn't take place, even in the midst of great conflict. In Houston, where we lived, about an hour away, is the town of Brenham. And there is the Bluebell factory. It's a great ice cream there. And we went and we did the tour when we lived in Houston. And at the end of the tour, where after you see how it's made, they take you into their parlor, and they actually serve you not like a little taste, but a huge ice cream cone. I thought that was so cool. I thought, wow, how cool. You all get a free ice cream cone. But it's not surprising. That's where they make it. And so we shouldn't be surprised that when we go there and take a tour, that you would actually get to have it. And that's like Christians. We make peace. We're peace factories. People come into our life, it should be normal. Again, it's one of the 8 Beatitudes that we would not only have peace, but we would make peace. So we'd be like, oh, you came into my life. You shouldn't just observe that I'm peaceful. You should be able to take peace with you when you leave. Here, let me help you taste it. It's one of the most attractive things to the outsider because they see our troubles, and if they see our peace, they'll want our faith. And it's so simple. The most powerful evangelical book written by Billy Graham was Peace with God. Peace, that's the word the outsider wants. They want to know, how can you have peace? And we're made to not just experience it, but we're made to offer it. And so when people come into our lives, they can experience peace. And it's a lot like it's our expertise. It's our family business. Is this marking your life? This can come to you from Jesus. Well, why is this peace, or what makes this peace unique? If this is a little bit about why it's so important, what makes this peace unique? And I mean, especially from righteousness, so-called man-made righteousness, legalistic righteousness, churchianity, the religious leaders, the Pharisees, like we've been talking. Well, so often for peace in religion, it's not producing peace inside of people. My dad had a friendship with a psychiatrist for many of his years when he was in ministry, because the psychiatrist had an insight on people, and he could tell him about the way people behave and different things. So my dad would talk to him, and I remember one day the psychiatrist told my dad, he said, you ministers keep us in business. And my dad's like, well, what do you mean? He says, well, you make people sick. You realize that? He's like, excuse me? He's like, you're creating guilt in people. Your moralism just stirs up conflict, and they kind of know every Sunday what they're supposed to do, and then they don't do it, and then it creates this gap, and then they eventually come see me. And that's a comment on religion, religious man-made righteousness. It's just one more thing to do every Sunday. That's just another thing that we're supposed to do, and I don't do it. And that's just more burdens. And this is the way it was for the Pharisees. Jesus told them, he says, you just put so many burdens on people, things you're not even willing to do yourselves. You just keep piling them on people. And that shouldn't be. It shouldn't be that way in our life. We should be about the relief of burdens, not the placing of burdens on people. We should be more about peace and not about internal conflict. And then there's also in the name of religion, there's also the wars that have been fought, the church splits, the parties, the factions, the personality conflicts, the tense meetings. I don't know if you've seen the cartoon where the 10 people are sitting around a table in a church, and the chairman looks at everybody and he says, well, given the hostilities in this meeting tonight, we're going to all keep our eyes open as we close in prayer. And we say, ha ha, that's the way it often is, even in church, right? So again, it's unique that there would be peace, that there would be harmony between us is something that's very unique to the God-made, God-given righteousness. Well, how do we get this peace? So the last question I'll give on this, how do we get this peace? The one who taught this is the Prince of Peace. And one day he stood and he spoke to the wind and the waves, and he said, sit, be still. And they went like a sea of glass. And he can look right now. He can listen. He's the one who can calm your heart. He said, let not your heart be troubled. That wasn't just a teaching. He can just look at your heart. And he said, I know the world has trouble, but not your heart. Let not your heart be troubled. And he can speak to it. And I pray he does. I pray right today in my weakness and in his strength and his power, he would speak to your heart. And he would say, peace, be still, my peace. My peace I give to you. And he would breathe on you, the Holy Spirit. That's how you get it. You get it when Jesus is real to you. And if he's not real to you, you're not a Christian. If you're a Christian, then you put your faith and trust in him, come back to that same faith, and look back at that same Jesus for more than just forgiveness, and say, Jesus, calm my heart. You calm the troubled seas, and one day you'll calm this earth when the lion will lie down with the lamb. But right now, in this moment, I need you, the same one, to calm my heart. Speak to my heart and say, be still. Be still. He can do that for you. And your peace and my peace, it's all about Jesus. Nearness to him, a sense of his presence. I know when I was a little boy, one of my first memories, I can laying in bed at night and I can't sleep. And it's been hours and I'm getting anxious. Not about a burglar, because my little cute brother was in the room. There's no way anybody would hurt him. And my blanket's covering me, so I'm safe. I'm not worrying about a burglar. I'm just worried that I'm the only one awake in the family, and I must be weird. It must be strange. And so as I finally get the nerve up, I go down the hall and I knock on the door of my parents, and my mom says, "Come in." She hears me right away. And this is where it ends. My memory ends as I crawl up in the bed, and I remember my dad's on this side and my mom's on this side. And I'm barely resting between them. And I can't remember anything else. Because in the other room for hours I couldn't sleep. But in that sense of my dad and my mom, it's like immediately the anxiety goes away. And I fall asleep. Little kid, childlike. And it's the same thing today. A sense of Jesus, like, I don't know what it is for you. There's so many things that can stir up the water of our hearts. But listen, there's only one thing that will solve it. Comment. And it's a sense of Jesus. And he's the only one who can speak to you and go, he can look at you in your mind's eye and just shake his head a little bit kindly and say, "It's not for me, it's not for me." And then you just, I don't know what it is. Let him give you that peace. It's a part of the Christian experience. It's one of the big 8 Beatitudes that characterize what it really means to be Christian. So we might as well take it and run with it and make it, enjoy it, serve it to other people. It characterizes us. We are peacemakers. Well, then, the last one, and this is going to seem very different, but let it be tied into the whole experience. Blessed are the persecuted. Blessed are the persecuted. Those who have these other 7 Beatitudes, they are also persecuted. Not because they're offensive, not because they're misguided in their zeal, not because they're stupid and obnoxious in their own personalities, not because they go and bring this on themselves. Jesus said, no, persecuted for righteousness' sake. It's like you're really living out this God-made righteousness, and when you go out and live it out, you get hurt for it, you get beaten for it. They even take your life, your family, your freedom. They take your house. They make you run away. Jesus says, you're doing the right thing. This is for me. You did something good, and you went out and you were expecting a reward or a blessing, and then instead, they killed you. And this is the irony, and it's the final Beatitude, and it doesn't take away from the other 7. It makes all 7 and the whole Christian experience authentic. And it pays the price for it, and it shows how expensive and how wonderful it is. And it sets the standard for how much it means, how great it is. And so we see this last Beatitude, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. It's the same promise as the first Beatitude. The first one was focusing on getting in the kingdom. The last one is focusing on the ultimate destiny and the reward in the kingdom. But basically, peacemakers get persecuted. If we go off peacemakers, and I think of Anwar Sadat, the 3rd president of Egypt. Do you remember him? He was like one of the greatest peacemakers in the Middle East ever. And do you remember in 1981 when he was reviewing his troops in the parade? It was on the worldwide TV. Do you remember this? And a vehicle backs up and a bunch of men jump out the back, and they've got grenades and they've got machine guns, and he and all his men, except Mubarak, who miraculously survives it, are killed. Do you remember that? Anwar Sadat, great peacemaker, and what happened? He was killed. Peacemakers get persecuted. Cops, policemen who are trying to keep the peace go into domestic disturbances, and they interrupt family fights trying to keep the peace, and that's where most of them get killed. Most police fatalities are interrupting family fights, and they're trying to make peace, and what happens? They get shot. And it's the same for the military. As we said, so many fatalities for our military trying to keep peace in the world, and we see how much they get persecuted, and the same is true. In the ultimate sense, the same is true for Christians who are peacemakers, who are making peace spiritually, who are making peace internally, who are making peace relationally, who really are living out the God-made righteousness in this world. How does that turn out for them? Oh, not very well. From a worldly perspective, from a human perspective, their lives are ruined. And they keep going for it. They keep, by the millions, converting to Christ and being killed. And this is what we see, and we go and we check the history and we say, well, is that true? Yeah, Christians are by far the most persecuted religious group worldwide. You can check this out, any source you want. There were more Christians martyred in this last century, in the 20th century, than in all the other centuries combined since the church began. And if we just go by this century, in the 21st century, whole villages have been massacred in Nigeria. This is just in the last 16 years. 70,000 forced to leave their homes in Orissa, India. These are our brothers and sisters. You know, while we're enjoying the American dream, we can't imagine what they're going through on the same planet. It's just unbelievable. They're living their worst nightmare, and they're in our family all over the world, and it's hard for us to even think that it could happen, but it's true. What Jesus is predicting has come true in many ways. 10,000 slaughtered in Indonesia just in the 21st century. 80,000 cleansed from their homes in Syria. Have you been hearing it on the news? They keep saying Christians, and they talk about killings and cleansings and refugees, and those are our brothers and sisters. And that's not to make us feel guilty. That is not my purpose today. Or even to talk about taking care of them and how we should take. No, that's not my purpose either. It's not, because there's a much greater purpose. What is our faith like that they would suffer for it? How should that change us when it comes to how we look at Jesus and the Christian faith? If it meant that to them and they gave everything for it, what does our Christian faith mean to us? It must be significant. And we keep going. Christian Solidarity Worldwide reports that 180 Christians are killed each month somewhere in the world. Christians face significant persecution over 60 different countries, from their governments, from their surrounding neighbors, from their families. It's not working out for them. It's not turning out well. If they were living their Christian faith to have a nice result because it would bring a great reward for them in this life, that would not be happening. They've lost their job, they've lost their homes, they've lost their families, they've been imprisoned, they've been severely tortured, and they've been executed. And it's all over the news every day. How about the disciples? We go back to them. Those men and the others that were closest to Jesus from the beginning of the Christian faith, when it was first starting to be spread, and they were the closest to the reality of this thing, that we hope we're genuine. And so we go back to the beginning and say, well, what was it like for those who were there, who were really catching it at the very beginning? What did they get persecuted? Well, James, son of Zebedee, and Paul, the apostle, were both beheaded. Matthew was killed by a poleaxe, who wrote the first gospel and the first book in the New Testament. James the Just, who wrote the book of James, who led the early church, and Mark, the second gospel, were beaten to death with a club. Thomas, doubting Thomas, remember him? He was killed with a spear. Luke, third book in the New Testament, he was hanged. Stephen and Matthias, who replaced Judas, they were both stoned. Simon the Zealot, Bartholomew, Jude, Andrew, and Philip were all crucified, just like Jesus was. And of course, the Apostle Peter was crucified upside down. Now, these guys are normal, ordinary people. So here's our tendency. Well, all the martyrs, they're so special. Let's put them on a pedestal. It's like, no, not these men. These men were doubting. They were afraid. Remember, they were hiding behind locked doors after Jesus was crucified. Remember them? They deserted Jesus when he needed him the most. They were slow to learn. They were doubtful. There were so many things about them that were just like you and me. They were diverse. They were very different. Jesus purposely picked these guys to be representative of all of us so that we wouldn't put them on a pedestal when they gave their life. When they were killed for their faith, he wanted us to not think about them as being special. He wanted us to think about the faith being special. Because you know what? You could be like that. I could be like that. We are persecuted for righteousness' sake. That's what we're like. We have been given something that's better than our life. We've been given something that's worth dying for. We've been given something that's better than the whole world, and we finally have the capacity to sacrifice. This is about our capacity to give. We can give at the level of a martyr, of a sacrifice, and it's just part of the Christian experience. It's that significant. You see, Christianity is free, but it's not cheap. It's free, but it changes your life, and it gives you a whole new capacity. And you say, that's so wonderful. I think I could lay my life down. Some of us have had to wait till we've gotten married or till we've had a child before we say that. But you should say that about Jesus and your faith. You should say, this is taking you over, and this is something that's significant enough for me. Yes, I would lay down my life. I would do these things that God is doing in me, even if the world hated it, even if the world insulted it, even if the world persecuted me and killed me, took my freedom and my family. And I'm telling you, that's what our brothers and sisters are doing all over the world. It shouldn't make us feel guilty. It should make us realize our faith is that good. Our Christianity is that wonderful. And we too could have that capacity to give to where it could be the most significant thing in our life. So God may not ask you to lay down your life, lose your home, your family, your freedom, but he will give you a capacity to give that's not some little thing. Not some little thing. And it's a mark, it's one of the 8 marks of the genuine Christianity, is that it won't go well for you in this world. You'll be persecuted for doing good things, for doing things for Jesus, for doing things for righteousness. And you'll be blessed. You'll rejoice and be glad because you know your reward is great in heaven. So the disciples go out and they're like, yay, 3,000 saved after the first sermon. Peter's so excited. They're baptized. They're being new people are being added every day. Yay. His shadow passes over people and they're healed. He's like, whoa, this is awesome. Big time miracles are happening. Angels are opening prisons and they're able to walk out. And they're like, hey, this is so cool. They're sharing meals together and giving their land and their possessions to one another, so there's no one with any need, and they're like, yeah, this is awesome. And then all of a sudden they're arrested and flogged. Bummer. And all of a sudden, James, I think, was one of the first ones that was killed. And we read about in the book of Acts, it's like, whoa, there were blessings and there were beatings. There was the fruit, and then there was the fire. And sometimes we're so into the blessing, and our little faith is like, hey, it's working for me. Look at the blessings. Look at the results. Yay. But what about when you do the right thing and you just get like stomped? You just get hurt. And you're like, I wish I had never done that right thing. That right thing made my life so much harder. What's up with this? And God's like, so is that your? He's like, that's man-made righteousness. You do this and you get blessed. You do this, it works. It's your little rabbit's foot. He said, my righteousness is so good, you'll die for it. And so when you live out my righteousness, so much of the time it just makes your life harder. But you rejoice to do it. And this is where Jesus says, rejoice, be glad. It's like, what? He talked about the prophets. He said, this is what happened to their life. He goes, you remember Amos and Jeremiah and Isaiah? Amos was a fig picker. He was a farmer, and he just lived out in the country in Tekoa. And God came to him one day and said, Amos, buddy, I got something for you to do. Okay. Take my words to the city, and when you go there, they're not going to listen. So I can tell you, as a minister, it's really hard. People don't listen, and you're supposed to speak. It's really hard. And not only that, they're not going to believe you, and they're going to be nasty to you, and it was the same for Jeremiah and Isaiah, and Isaiah just said, how long, Lord? How long? I mean, basically, you've just given me an assignment that's going to ruin I'm toast, thanks to you. How long do I do this? Jeremiah just cried his way. He wrote a book called Lamentations, which means crying. He cried his way, the grief of a prophet that was never believed. And Jesus said, I love these guys. He said, that are like this, he says, you're going to be in the same heritage with these prophets, because he said, great is their reward in heaven. And for the first time, Jesus speaks out in the progress of the Bible and the progress of Revelation about the afterlife. It's like in the Old Testament. We don't hear much about the afterlife. It's like, well, we know the road goes farther, but this map doesn't show it. That's about the Old Testament. It'll just say like forever, and it never says much specifically. And then Jesus comes along, and in this first 8 lines, he's already talking about it. He's like, man, your life takes place in 2 dimensions, and this dimension is very short. You should lay up for yourself treasures in the next dimension. And he said, there's no faster way to put treasure in heaven than when you suffer for me. If you do something, Jesus says, for my sake, for righteousness' sake, and you suffer for it, you should have a party. Because there's no more sure, quick way to store up for yourselves treasures in heaven than that. And so we should live not for this life. Heaven's going to be there, and we determine the location and the quality of our eternity in this little inch of time. And so heaven's going to be, there's going to be no sorrow or pain, but it's not going to be the same for everybody. We get there. In this little inch of time, we form the heart that will most enjoy heaven. And so it's in our pain, it's in our suffering, it's in our grief, it's in our persecution, it's in our heart that is broken, that longs for things and waits for things and doesn't get them. That heart that's there, that's the heart that will most enjoy heaven forever. And so it's not an easy life right now. It's a life of waiting. It's a life of groaning. But then it's a life of glory when we get to heaven. We'll most enjoy heaven, those who have lived for Christ on earth. And this is Jesus. He's just giving, this is brand new in the Bible. He just starts to open up the next dimension and say, live your life for then. Live this life for then. And if you do, you'll throw a party, even when your life's ruined. And so we read in Hebrews, others were, Hebrews 11, the hall of faith. Others were tortured and refused to be released. These are our brothers and sisters, so that they may gain a better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging, while still others were chained and put in prison. They were stoned and they were sawed in two. They were put to death by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains, and in caves and holes in the ground. Not the celebrities, no, the really great people in the kingdom one day, people whose lives were snuffed out almost immediately. We never heard about them. It's like, oh, they didn't really get to enjoy their life. It's like, oh, don't be fooled. They'll be most rewarded in heaven. I've always been greatly impacted by the military, to be honest with you. Growing up in Norfolk, Virginia Beach, and being there the last 17 years, I see the price that's paid for our freedom, and I watch movies like Act of Valor about our Navy SEALs, and at the end of the movie, and I've seen it many times, it scrolls the names of the actual SEALs who have died, who have given their lives, and every time I get to that point in the movie, I cry. I cry my eyes out because I know it's so real. And this is just about our country. This is just the value that's given to our freedom in our country that's measured by our military, especially those the most trained, the most committed, the ones who have died for our country. And it just powerfully, it sets the bar for commitment. And as a man, when I think about what's really hard or difficult in my life and whether I've really come to that point of giving that, it's all measured by these guys that go and live in the desert for 9 months out of a duffel bag, and they're deployed away from their families. I'm like, man, that just measures it for me. And time again, I've met these real people that serve like that, and I'm redefined by that. And I think of that scrolling of the names when I think of all those in the persecuted church. And it has that same positive effect. I hope it would have that effect on you and on me. My son went to Texas A&M, and his first year, the Corps that get the really short haircuts and they march all over campus, and they have all these extra disciplines that the other students are not required to have. But they're the gatekeepers of the traditions and the spirit of the university. And the university is great. And when everybody thinks of the greatness of the university, they think of those yell leaders, not cheerleaders, yell leaders that are all from the Corps, that lead the football game cheers. And they lead all the pep rallies, and there's this amazing school spirit because the gatekeepers show that through their commitment. And I think of that with the martyrs. I think of that with those who are persecuted, asked to pay that price. It should redefine for all of us the value of Jesus and the gospel and the kingdom. And this is something that I think can powerfully impact us. As we conclude, I want Jesus to be able to increase your capacity to give. We're going to take communion in just a minute after we respond and sing. And when you think about how it all started with him giving his life as a martyr for you, and then you think of so many passing it along, gave their lives, I want you to think of that positively and let it come to you that your Christianity would be a significant thing worth dying for. Is what you're living for worth dying for? Let Jesus increase your capacity to give so that you too can join in the long train of those who are persecuted for their faith. Oh, I offer that. It's just part of the meal. It's part of the righteousness that's given by grace. Let's bow our heads and pray. As we conclude these 8 Beatitudes, I want you to stop for a minute and ask yourself if you have it. If you don't, or if you're wanting to confirm that you have it, you can do that right now. In this moment before we all leave and go home, and there's the faith in the room. There is the Word of God ringing in the room, the presence of Jesus, great because we're all gathered. I would like to ask you to, just from your heart, just say, Jesus, feed me this meal. I want to be like this. I want to have a genuine Christian faith. And I pray right now that you'll respond and be real with him, even to the point where he'll make you a peacemaker and someone who's willing and strong and able to be persecuted and rejoice. Just receive that right now. You can do that where you're sitting. Just tell Jesus, Jesus, I want to make me like you have so many others. Forgive my sin. Change my life. I want to be your genuine disciple. You can do that right now. Go ahead and invite you to say that to him. Maybe you've said it before and you just want to say it again in a fresh way. We want you to be real. We want our church to really be Fairfield Christian Church. And move forward. We're imperfect, but we need Jesus in a real way. And so I pray right now, Father, do this for us. Give us this. Thank you, Jesus. Lead us as our head, as our main leader, and take us as failing human beings in the direction that you've taken so many others, Lord. We're not afraid. We want the real Christian experience, the blessings and the beatings, the fruit and the fire. Oh, Lord, give us something worth dying for, something better than the world, better than life. And give us your peace. Lord, breathe on us your peace. We pray this in your wonderful name, in the name of Jesus. Amen.